What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of my top 10 favorite ice and snow levels in video games. For those that are wondering where part 1 is, it's up on my channel now, so I suggest you see that for numbers 10 through 8. And basically come back here for the next group of videos. And considering everything, yeah, there's a good chance we might have 3 parts to this, so, who knows? That being said, without further ado, let's get back into this kiss off of winter. Moving on next at number 7, we have Macalania from Final Fantasy X. Yeah. For those that are possibly wondering, most of my life, the only video games I've mostly played were Pokemon and Fire Emblem, with a bit of divergence to playing games Mario, Zelda, and even Smash Brothers. However, that being said, recently I decided to more or less branch out into other franchises. And one of those franchises was the Final Fantasy franchise. In fact, the first ever Final Fantasy game I've ever played was Final Fantasy X, which, for the most part, everyone knows about how, laughably awful the game can be, and they tend to use Tidus laughing as a point of that. However, that being said, most of the areas are kinda interesting and they're actually kind of amazing places. I mean, with Kilika Island basically being just or Besaid Island kind of like an island paradise. You have Xanarkand being this immersive, futuristic city. Luca being a port city where a sports tournament is held. Seriously don't know why. And you have Mihen Road being a pretty long road that is made easier by traveling when traveling on chocobos. However, honestly, if there's ever an area that I've more or less loved, it's Macalania. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people won't think of this as your standard ice area. But surprisingly enough, it is. And in all fairness, if I have to say one thing, it's chef's kiss. Because, and granted, I know on the ground it's not ice or snow, but it's just an accumulation of faith that creates a crystalline, a crystalline sheen that makes it look like crystals growing from the ground. And honestly, it's just so beautiful. To the point I felt like I was at peace. And boy oh boy, during 2020, I was more or less feeling at peace in most forests like Glimwood Tangle and Macalania. Especially while the world was burning outside. But then again, when it comes down to it, it's made even further with the existence of the firebugs, who are just twinkle like stars. And granted, even with the plot relevance, it's just amazing. Since we do get a little bit of a nice little tender moment between Tidus and Yuna. which honestly, definitely, he put them at a fairly high chance on my high spot in my romantic relationships in video games list. However, Locke and Celis kind of outpaced them. And even with that, you have an area that's kind of like a frozen lake with a travel agency on there, as well as an inn, which is just kind of nice and cozy. And then you have Macalania Temple, which gives you the Ice Eon Shiva. Which, while I haven't gotten that far, the fact this is where you can get Shiva, yeah, this is one of the most fitting things ever. And it's and it even fits even further once you realize that Final Fantasy XIII gave us a character named Snow who can summon Shiva. Well, play Final Fantasy XIII and find out. Yeah. Not going into that. Moving on next, at number 6, we have Winter Horns from Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Oh boy! We go from a almost snowy, wintry, crystalline forest to a more or less notable area in a Kirby game that's more similar to the modern world. And honestly, if you already hadn't guessed, I am in love with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And that's saying a lot considering I played Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot before this. So, really does say a lot. But even further, Kirby and the Forgotten Land is implied to more or less be, well, Earth, but after an apocalypse. Like post-apocalyptic Earth. And many of the levels in the game show it, since they have areas based on an actual mall, a car dealership, and even a hotel resort, which suggests that the world and even an amusement park, which suggests that the world Kirby and the Forgotten Land is set in, used to be home to humans. And if that's not enough, Winter Horns just puts it into an entire new perspective, since that first area is more or less a, well, dare I say, a cityscape. And I say cityscape, but in reality, it looks like a full-on town based off of the location in one of Charles Dickens's novels. Like, if you haven't read Oliver Twist, or if you've ever read Oliver Twist or A Christmas Carol, you have an idea of what the town setting or city settings in those books are more or less looking like through the descriptions. And oh my god, it brings to mind those two novels. Especially the former, because I'm more or less half expecting Oliver Twist to come out of the woodwork and Mr. Bumble to come out of the woodworks and being like, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" More? Yeah, I'm kind of I was kind of half expecting that. But it almost makes you wonder what life was like before the events of Kirby and the Forgotten Land. But it gets even further, as basically you have Kirby, after that one, you have Kirby traverse through an abandoned subway station. Okay, first an abandoned Victorian town, then a subway station? Honestly, it was at this point the post-apocalyptic Earth theories were just formulating in my head. And it goes even further as we got to the third and fourth ones, which had Kirby traversing across the rooftops of houses while trying to prevent himself from getting blown off, which is kind of a nice little thing that we don't see in this sort of level. And even crossing a bridge that serves as a somewhat mini-boss gauntlet. However, the big one is the final area, which is set in a abandoned chapel, where you face off against King Dedede himself. And honestly, this is just one of the more beautiful areas you face off against Dedede in. And honestly, it is just so amazing. Too bad Dedede has to kidnap Elfilin after you defeat him. Otherwise, we'd see more of this beautiful area. And I literally mean it. Whew. But at least we keep going on. That's all I gotta say. Moving on next at number 5, we have the Snow Kingdom from Super Mario Odyssey. Speaking of somewhat open world games, it's fair to say Mario has a sort of an interesting relationship with snow levels, as he has had some amazing ones. But surprisingly enough, it's fair to say they topped it with Super Mario Odyssey's Snow Kingdom and the realm of Shiveria, which is just an amazing area. And the fact when you first arrived there, turns out the Brutals have stolen the frosted cake that's basically given to the winner of a race. And of course, even with that, this means you have to set out on a sort of wintry expedition to basically face off against Rango in a little arena. And soon afterwards, you more or less have to find a way to get the multi-moon from that. Which means you have to participate in a race yourself. And the only way to do it? You find a Shiverian that's suffering from stage fright, and you capture him to give him the confidence to participate in the race. And you control him yourself. And I gotta say, the Bound Bowl is fun. I mean, it's a little it's a little unwieldy to say the least, but honestly, I prefer the Bound Bowl to Blitzball any day of the week. And even after you get the multi-moon, you don't have to leave anywhere afterwards, because you can explore the snowy region and see a lot of the beautiful sights. The vast whiteness, the emptiness. It fits for a world just blanketed in snow. I mean, heck, you can even wear a parka. Wear a parka all your own while traversing the area. Unless you're one of those guys who makes Mario run around in his boxer shorts. Because, then again, why would you? On second thought, don't answer that. This will be continued in part 3.